So 2025 is over. Real estate was a little bit wild, but at the same time, pretty boring. What's going to happen for 2026? Let's look into it. Hi, my name is Jeremy Tremblay. I'm a local realtor that works here in Belleville and the surrounding areas. Appreciate you checking out this video. We're going to look into some real estate stats, but also really just my predictions of what's going on. But if you want to chat a little bit more after this, definitely reach out. My information down below in the description. Really appreciate that subscribe, and also if you can hit the thumbs up. Let's get to it. So, real estate. Obviously, that's what you're looking for. You're trying to figure out what is it that's going to happen. Everyone's making predictions at this point. We are now into January of 2026, and everyone's wondering what's going on. Whether you're looking to buy a house, whether you're looking to sell a house, or you're just kind of interested what direction are we going in. So today, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and just say, throw out some predictions, knowing that nobody actually knows what's going to happen next. But first, what I want to do is look at 4 stats. Every month, I try and look at the progression in this area as to what's happening in real estate, specifically Belleville surrounding areas. So when I look at these stats, you're going to see Belleville, Quinte West, Trenton mentioned. And if you don't know where that is, look at Toronto, Ontario, Canada, which is the Greater Toronto Area, largest city in all of Canada. And there's the Highway 401, also the busiest highway in all of North America. So you take Toronto, head east about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and you'll hit this area, Belleville and Quinte West. That's where I'm getting the stats because I think that's what represents this area quite well. We're going to look at 4 simple stats, nice and quick, and that way we can find out roughly what's going on. Then I'm going to tell you 3 things that I think we need to be watching out for that will affect this year's real estate market drastically. It could go one way or another. Stay tuned for those. Let's start with the stats. So the first stat we're going to look at is the months of inventory. If you don't know what that is, you often hear about a balanced market or a buyer or seller's market. This is what they're referencing. So I always like to remind people the numbers the industry tends to use are 0 to 3 months of inventory. That means you are in a seller's market. Between 3 and 5, roughly, you are in a balanced market. Over 5 months of inventory, you are into a buyer's market. So the buyers have the advantage at that point. And so we've been tracking this throughout the year. And if we look at this chart right here, we can see going back to December of last year and then December of this year, roughly right at the same spot, 5.6 months of inventory for the month of December. Now, mind you, in November, it actually peaked at just about 6.5 months of inventory. So by those metrics, we are into a buyer's market, and that's what people are hearing. That's what they're feeling as well, and this seems to be confirming it. Now, we are in the winter here in Canada, and it is cold. People don't want to go out as much, and generally, sales tend to be less. There's less inventory out there, which will affect this as well. Next one we look at, average sale price. Everyone wants to know when they're buying or selling what the averages are, and as you can see from this one here, average sale prices have dropped off in the area. And you're looking over the whole year, we were kind of in that 500,000 to 600,000 range all throughout. We started the year back in December, just over 500,000, and then went up, peaked at around 600,000, and then kind of fluctuated. But then these last couple months of the year started dropping off, and we actually ended at $450,000 as the average sale price. And that includes all sales in this area. And so that's something to really take note of, especially, well, really for both sides. When you're buying, this may help spur you on, but when you're selling, you need to recognize what's happening there. And people's expectations are changing. Next, number of sales. This is an interesting chart right here, very seasonal. I've said it before, real estate tends to follow different seasons. This very clearly displays that. So looking all the way back to last year, the total number of sales was just over 50 sales for the month, and it climbed all the way up into May, April into May, and then you saw quite a few, over 160 sales, and then started dropping. The one thing we didn't really see this year, which you sometimes do, is a fall market. So people kind of go on vacation during the summer, come back looking to buy so they can get a house before Christmas. Well, we really didn't see much of that August, September, October. It kind of flatlined and then started falling again into the winter months where we expect there to be less sales. So we ended off the year in December, 63 sales total. So it's low, but also if you're looking compared to last year, we are up a little bit for the total number of sales. And then finally, days on market. So how long is it taking for a house to sell on average? And this past month, December 2025, we hit 41 sales. The month prior, we were at 44. As you go along, you can see we were in that 40 range, which in my opinion is a healthy range. One thing you'll note here, when you see this graph, January of last year, we had a big peak at 60 days. which often people look at and will say, hey, that means houses are sitting, they're not selling. Well, actually, when I dug into those numbers a little bit more, what I saw was there were a lot of homes that weren't selling, and this data takes everything up to that point, meaning houses that had been priced really high for a really long time and people were letting them sit. There were some that were on the market upwards of 300-400 days. They were just very unrealistic with their pricing. And then eventually, this time last year, they started saying, okay, well, we finally need to sell. They put their price into a range that made sense. It sold, and the data came in that, hey, all these houses that were sitting forever have finally sold. But then it also change the average for days on market. So we'll see if that happens again going into this next year. But overall, when you look at this, not really alarming one way or another. The average price being down is something that you definitely want to take note of. But other than that, not a lot of change from where we were this time last year, which is quite interesting to note. So with that, the stats tell us this from this past month, but what do we think is going to happen as we go into 2026 with the housing market? Well, first off, I will say, never look at the real estate market as Canada-wide. People often do that. The news does that. They say Canada is one big market. It is not the case whatsoever. If you go coast to coast, different markets, you will have very different sentiments that are applying in these different areas. You go to Quebec, things are doing great. You go over to Alberta versus going to BC versus going to Ontario, you'll have up markets and down markets all at the same time. And so real estate in Canada, very much regional. You have to look at the area where you are, and right now we're looking more in Ontario, and really we're referencing smaller towns in Ontario, like Belleville here in Quinte West or Prince Edward County. And so the first thing that I am looking at and going to comment on in terms of predictions is the mortgage cliff. We've been hearing that for a number of years, and we're starting to hear that come back now, saying 2026 is the year where people are going to have to basically sell their homes because they can't afford to keep them, because they got mortgages back in 2020, 2021, and in Canada, getting a 5-year mortgage was the standard. And so they're thinking now's the time where those mortgages are up. They all had mortgages at 2%, sometimes even lower, and now they're having to renew at twice the price. They can't afford that. They're going to have to sell their home. That's going to trigger a crash because everyone's trying to sell, and our market's going to fall. That's what you're hearing. I've read many stories, many people on YouTube saying that. I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I speak to a lot of mortgage brokers, and there are a few key details that the public seems to be leaving out, or the news seems to be leaving out. The first one is all the people that got a mortgage that was variable. Well, those people have ridden out, and me being one of them, I had one mortgage where it went as high as over 6%. So starting down at 2 went all the way up to 6. And then it's made its turn and come back down again into the 4 range. That's already happened. Everybody that got those variable mortgage back then, they've already gone through that pain. That pain has made its way through the market already. So if you're waiting for that to be the effect, it's gone. That portion is over. We're not dealing with that anymore because now those variable rates they're kind of on their way down. And then the next one is people that are going to be renewing at a higher rate, which is definitely the case here. But the one thing many are forgetting is the stress test that we have in place here in Canada. The whole point of that was, okay, you're trying to get a mortgage. Well, the government put in place for certain types of mortgages, and many people had to go through this, a stress test. And for most, it was around 5.25%. That's generally what it was at the time, meaning if you're trying to get a mortgage that had a low interest rate, the bank would actually say, can you afford if ever the rate went up to 5.25%? We're going to look at everything that you make, your income, and if it were to happen that your mortgage had to be that high, could you afford it? Many people, tons of people went through that stress test. Well, right now, if someone could have afforded 5.25% when they first got it, and they're renewing right now, you're renewing around 4%. And so the people that could afford 5.25% having to renew at 4%, likely not going to be that big of an issue. And then one other point that I'll add on to that I'm hearing people doing is if they are in that scenario where they have to renew, their mortgage goes up by hundreds of dollars every month and they can't afford the payment, the banks are given the option saying, well, we can stretch out your amortization. So you paid off 5 years of your mortgage, but you know what? Instead of 25, you're at 20. Let's stretch it back out to 25. Lower your monthly payment. Overall, you're going to pay more interest in the long term, but you can still hold on to your home. That's something else. So all this talk about mortgage cliff, It doesn't seem to be happening. There's still talk of it. There's still a chance that the people are going to be affected, but I don't, in my opinion, think it's going to be nearly as big of an issue as many are making it out to be. The next thing that I think is going to be a huge portion of it, and I'm wondering where this is going to go myself, inventory. When I look at inventory in terms of how many sellers are going to put their house on the market, real estate is really an equation of supply and demand. So if we have a ton of homes flooding the market, but we don't have any buyers, well, that's going to be a pretty big deal, because suddenly you're going to have a lot of sellers and buyers are going to have all their choice. And what are they going to do? They're going to underbid. They're going to pay less. Prices will come down. But if we don't have many people putting their house on the market, but we still have buyers, well, then suddenly that underbidding goes away and then it starts to slant. Nobody knows what's going to happen. I personally have been in discussion with a lot of different people thinking about listing their home. A lot of people waiting. Many people waiting for spring, because we don't really know what's going to be going on next. And so that one is really up in the air. It's a toss-up. In my opinion, I suspect that we are going to have a little bit more inventory, people that have been waiting. And at this point, interest rates, they're kind of flattened out at this point. The Bank of Canada has told us that not to expect much change. And so all the people that are waiting on more news, well, they're being told that there isn't any more news. So time to make a choice. And so I think that's the type of thing that may bring other people to say, you know what, it's time to put our house up. But that could also be the same for buyers that were waiting for rates to continue going down. Well, if they think that's done, they've met the bottom of the rates, they may say, okay, time to buy. So this is going to be a big one to watch. I think that'll have a huge effect on what's going to happen in the market this year. And finally, there's the major wild card. It's going to be the political landscape and then the world landscape that's going to affect everything, because ultimately sentiment of buyers and sellers is what dictates what they do. And if people are fearful, well, then they act in fear. They don't list their home because they're fearful. They don't buy because they're fearful. And they're fearful because they don't know what's going to happen. And right now we're seeing a lot of political upheaval within many different countries. And we've gone through this whole year with tariffs and still no resolution on that. And as we started off 2026, things aren't looking like they're going to be calm and steady. And so this is going to be one of those ones where no one knows what's going to happen, but it will most definitely have an effect on markets, and it's something you're going to want to watch. And so when I'm talking to people and they're asking me what's going to happen this year, what's your prediction? I'm like, well, as of right now, I will say I'm predicting a steady market. I'm not expecting it to go up, really. But at the same time, I'm not expecting the bottom to fall out. I still see enough buyers there to support it. But there's always that asterisk. What's going to go on this political landscape? Because there are so many things breaking out in so many different countries. How will that affect things? That's a conversation that is ongoing, and we'll have to keep having that conversation. So appreciate you stopping by. Hopefully that's helped kind of frame what it is that you should be thinking of as you go forward into 2026 if you're thinking about buying or selling. And if you want to have that conversation, keep these going and saying, hey, what are you seeing locally in this market? Because that's the one we're interested in Belleville, Quinte West. Reach out to me. I'd love to have that conversation and kind of help hopefully guide you as you're making that decision. Information down below in the description. And if you've made it to this point and this has been helpful, trust me, it really helps if you hit that little thumbs up down below, and then check out the videos on the rest of my channel, and hopefully they can be helpful as well. My name's Jeremy Tremblay. Till next time.